last. She smiled at the wrong man. The Alpha King stepped in and claimed her. Mist clung to the streets of Arendor like a living shadow curling around lanterns and cobblestones. The kingdom, vast and ancient, was draped in secrets as old as the mountains that hemmed it in. At its heart rose the capital, a city of spires and silvered towers, where power was both celebrated and feared. And on this night the festival of the moon's veil lit the city in 1,000 flickering lights, but even fire could not chase away the sense of looming darkness. Ilara moved among the throngs with quiet grace. Her dress, a soft weave of sapphire and silver threads, shimmered in the torchlight. She smiled as she walked, careful to keep her head high despite the whispers of nobles who still remembered her family's fall from favor. Once her ancestors had commanded armies, held seats in a high council, and wielded influence with ease. Now the weight of lost legacy pressed on her shoulders, but she carried herself with the poise of someone who refused to vanish quietly. A stranger watched her from the shadows. His eyes glinted with something dangerous, and though she did not know it, he felt the pulse of a hidden magic within her. Ilara, unaware of the dormant curse that thrummed in her blood, smiled at a passing child, and that simple gesture sealed a path she had never chosen. It was then that the festival shifted. The air seemed to thicken, and a chill whispered through the crowd. A brush of movement caught Ilara's attention. A hand reaching, too fast, too certain. Before she could react, the stranger touched her shoulder, a touch light as silk, but cold as iron. "Ilara," he murmured, and the sound of her name made her shiver. "Bet, you do not yet understand what you carry." A pulse quickened! Something about him made the hair at the back of her neck rise. She tried to pull away, but the world seemed to narrow around them, the festival's laughter fading into a distant hum. From the shadows stepped a man who seemed to command the night itself. His presence was magnetic, almost cruel in its perfection. Black hair fell in dark waves across a face both beautiful and terrible. Eyes like storm-tossed seas bore into hers, and in that gaze was a warning she could feel in her bones. "Step away from her," the man said, his voice low, smooth, and commanding. It carried the authority of a king and the menace of a predator. The stranger released her instantly, stumbling back, and Ilara felt a breath she had not known she was holding finally leave her. Her heart hammered not just from fear, but from the strange, unfamiliar electricity that radiated from the man before her. He advanced, each step deliberate, and the crowd seemed to part without thought, giving him a path that led straight to her. Bass. He stopped before her, and the torches flickered against the planes of his face. "You carry a curse," he said. "One that could unravel the kingdom if left unchecked." Ilara blinked, confusion and disbelief mixing with the remnants of fear. "A curse?" she asked, her voice trembling. I don't understand." The man's lips curved, not in a smile, but in something that felt closer to a shadow of amusement. "Few do," he said. "That is why I claim you. You will come with me. No arguments." Panic flared and she shook her head. I don't belong to anyone." His expression hardened, and yet beneath the authority there was something softer, almost protective. "Not yet," he murmured. "But if you refuse, the darkness will take you, and no one else can stop it." She had spent her life trying to survive the whispers of her family's past, trying to walk carefully among nobles who measured worth in wealth and bloodlines. But she had never imagined that her life could be claimed by a man like this, or that magic so old and potent would make her a target. The stranger from before vanished into the crowd, and she realized he had been more than a man. Grasp. Something in his touch had awakened the first stirrings of her curse. She had felt it. a pulse deep in her chest, a warmth and a warning, all at once. The man, Kalen, did not wait for her answer. He lifted her arm gently but firmly, guiding her toward the black carved carriages waiting at the edge of the festival square. Elara resisted at first, but even her strength seemed to falter beneath the gravity of his presence. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice small, though her eyes burned with defiance. "To safety," he said, "and to the truth you have yet to face." The journey to Kalen's fortress was long and silent. The carriage rolled over cobblestones slick with mist, through forests whose trees seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. Elara could hear the faint rustle of the wind through leaves, but nothing else. No laughter, no other carriage, no footsteps. Only Kalen seated opposite her, a shadow in the candlelight, his eyes never leaving her face. "I am not your prisoner," she said after a while, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I will not be tamed by anyone, no matter how powerful." Kalen's smile was faint, nearly imperceptible, but his eyes darkened. "Bet tamed?" he asked softly, almost with curiosity. "Banned."
"I do not seek to tame you. I seek to protect what is mine, and you are already more than that."
"Bess." She recoiled slightly. His words unsettled her in ways she could not yet name. There was a weight to him, a pull that made her chest tighten. Something dangerous lived in the cadence of his voice, and in that danger she felt both fear and a spark of recognition. Fast.
The carriage wound through hills and valleys shrouded in mist.
Elara had tried to sleep, tried to find comfort in the rhythm of the wheels, but sleep would not come. Her mind churned with questions she had no answers for. What curse did she carry? Who was this man who could command shadows and silence so completely? Why did her blood feel warmer in his presence? And why did she feel so alive?
At dawn, the carriage arrived at the fortress.
Its walls were black stone, jagged and imposing, rising like the spires of a storm. Guards lined the gates, their armor dark as night, their eyes wary. Kalen did not speak as he led her inside, and Elara could not help but notice the way the fortress seemed alive. Whispers of magic in the stone, shadows that flickered at the edges of her vision. Inside, Kalen stopped in a high hall, its ceilings lost in darkness and torchlight catching on the polished floors. He turned to her, and for the first time he seemed to soften, though not entirely. "Here," he said, gesturing to a chamber at the far end. "You will remain safe for now." Elara swallowed. "Safe?" she repeated. "From what?" "From those who would use you, and from the curse you carry," he said. "From yourself if you cannot control it." The words curse and control echoed in her mind. For the first time, she felt the enormity of what she had stumbled into. She was no longer a girl who moved among festival lights and whispered rumors. She was a woman marked by destiny, claimed by a king, standing on the edge of forces she could not yet understand. Kalen studied her silently. "You may think you are frightened of me," he said finally, "but the curse does not wait for your permission." "It will not be polite. You must learn its name, its power, or it will learn yours for you."
Elara wanted to protest, to scream, to run, but something in the depth of his gaze held her in place.
There was danger there, yes, but also a promise that if she survived, if she learned, she would not face it alone. And yet, the thought of being claimed, even for protection, stirred a strange ache in her chest. She was angry, frightened, intrigued. She did not understand why, but already she felt tethered to this man whose presence was both threatening and magnetic. As Kaelin left her chamber, the last words he spoke lingered like smoke in the air.
The curse is not your enemy, Elara.
It is your path, and I will be walking it with you, whether you want me to or not. Alone, Elara pressed her hand to her chest. Her pulse raced not just with fear, but with something deeper, something she could not name. Outside her window, the mist clung to the fortress like a sentinel, and for the first time she felt the weight of her own destiny pressing in. She was no longer free. And she wondered, as the first light of dawn touched the black stones of the fortress, what it truly meant to be claimed, and what darkness might follow.
The fortress of Blackstone rose like a sentinel over the forest, its jagged spires piercing the morning mist.
Inside, silence ruled in corridors that were wide and shadowed, lit only by flickering torches. Elara followed Kaelin through the halls. Her steps, light but hesitant. The weight of her claim pressed on her. Not only the knowledge that she was now under his control, but the strange pull she felt toward him. It was a pull she did not understand, and one that frightened her more than the thought of enemies. Kaelin moved through the fortress with ease, every step precise, every gesture commanding attention. Guards bowed their heads as he passed, and servants whispered prayers under their breaths. Even the air seemed to bend toward him, carrying a faint pulse of power that made the hair on Elara's arms stand on end. "You will remain under observation," Kaelin said, stopping in a chamber lined with tall windows and heavy curtains. "Not as a prisoner," he added quickly, as her eyes widened in protest.
"But for your own protection, and to learn control," Elara bristled.
"Observation? You mean I am being watched like a caged bird?" Kaelin's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile.
"If you wish to call it that, but consider it training for your own safety."
"Bad. Soon, you will understand why it is necessary."
She wanted to argue, to demand freedom, but the truth was impossible to deny.
A strange warmth throbbed beneath her ribs, as if her own blood had awakened to a rhythm she could not command. Her curse, dormant until now, stirred in the presence of Kaelin's power. She had felt it faintly at the festival, but here, in the fortress, it grew stronger. "I don't even know what I am," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And you expect me to control it? You are more than what you know," Kaelin replied softly, stepping closer. "And I will not allow it to destroy you, or this kingdom." Elara flinched at the closeness, at the undeniable strength radiating from him. Her heart beat erratically, and she struggled to hide the tremor in her hands. "I don't need your protection," she said, though her voice faltered. Kaelin regarded her quietly for a long moment, as if weighing her words against something unseen. Then he nodded once. "Perhaps. Not. But you will have it whether you want it or not." The days that followed were a test of patience, endurance, and the subtle push and pull of power. Kaelin introduced her to the inner workings of the fortress, its walls, its secrets, the hidden chambers where magic slept in silence. He taught her to recognize the signs of the curse within her, the whispers of power that could bloom suddenly and dangerously if left unchecked. Ella struggled with every lesson. Her magic flared unpredictably, lighting the halls with bursts of blue fire, stirring the curtains and shaking the stones beneath her feet. Each time Kaelin was there, calm and unwavering, guiding her hand, steadying her pulse, speaking words she did not understand but somehow needed. "You are not a danger," he said one evening as they stood before a mirror of polished obsidian, "if you learn to master yourself. But if you fear yourself, it will master you instead." Her eyes met his in the reflection, and she shivered at the intensity of his gaze. It was not just authority she saw in him, but something deeper, something that pierced through the walls she had built around her heart. She wanted to look away, to retreat to a place where she was safe from him, from herself, from this strange connection she could not name. But she could not. In the quiet hours of the night, Elara began to see another side of Kalen, a side hidden beneath the armor of command and dominance. Moments when he paused in the halls listening to the wind, or when he allowed himself to laugh softly at something small and almost human. She caught him watching her sometimes, not with judgment, but with a consideration that felt as heavy as it did impossible. Yet trust was never easy. The memory of the stranger from the festival haunted her. She knew he had vanished into the city, but she sensed his presence still, a shadow at the edges of her awareness. Kalen's eyes, sharp and discerning, seemed to notice it too, though he said nothing. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Elara wandered to the edge of the fortress walls. The sky was painted with bruised purples and fiery gold, and she could hear the wind whispering through the spires. Her hands trembled and the pulse of the curse thrummed beneath her skin. Faster, louder. She felt it rising like a tide she could not stop. Kalen appeared silently behind her, as if he had been drawn to her by the same pulse.
It grows stronger, he said simply.
I cannot control it, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. It feels like fire and ice all at once. I am afraid of what I might do.
He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle, grounding her in a way that made her dizzy. Fear is natural, he said.
But so is strength. You will find yours. I will help you. Elara's breath caught, and for a moment she was lost in the storm of his presence. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, and she had to turn her gaze to the horizon to hide it. She would not allow herself to falter before him. Not fully. Brat. Not yet. Days passed, each one a mixture of lessons, whispered warnings, and the tension that grew like a living thing between them. Desk. Kalen pushed her to her limits, not with cruelty, but with the weight of responsibility, of protection, of unspoken emotion. Every glance lingered too long. Every command carried a current of something deeper. And every time her curse flared, so did the intensity of their bond. Fragile and dangerous, all at once. One night a letter arrived, carried by a shadowy messenger. It was sealed with a mark that Elara recognized immediately, the symbol of the stranger from the festival. Her pulse raced as she read the words, a message meant to manipulate, to tempt, to pull her into danger. Kalen watched over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. When she looked up, he simply said, "Do not underestimate him. He will seek to use your fear, your uncertainty, and your power. Best. She would not be a pawn, not in his hands or in anyone else's." But the truth of Kylan's words echoed in her mind. The stranger's influence was subtle, like a shadow creeping over the edges of her resolve. And she could feel her power responding to it, a warning that the danger was closer than she realized.
That night, sleep evaded her.
She lay in her chamber listening to the wind through the black stone, feeling the pulse of her own magic, and thinking of Kalen. He was a constant presence in her mind, commanding, frustrating, yet undeniably protective. She hated the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the way her thoughts stumbled over his words and his gaze. The next day, Kalen brought her to the training halls. They were vast, filled with weapons, magical implements, and a quiet sense of expectation. "Today," he said, "we test control, but over your curse, but over your fear. The mind is as powerful as the blood it commands."
Elara faced him, her hands trembling slightly, and tried to steady her breathing. The lessons had taught her much, but the fear of losing control was still strong.
Pay. Kalen watched her with that storm-tossed gaze, and for a moment she felt as if he could see every secret thought, every hidden tremor of doubt.
"You are ready?"
he said, though his tone carried a weight she could not place. And so, under his watchful eyes, Elara summoned the magic that pulsed within her. It flared, a brilliant blue light that danced along the walls and floor, a wave of energy that threatened to overwhelm her. But Kalen's presence was steady, a counterbalance to the chaos. She felt his hand brush hers briefly, guiding her, steadying her, and for the first time, she felt a spark of triumph. But triumph was fleeting. As the light subsided, a shadow flickered in the corner of the hall. The stranger, hiding, watching, waiting. Inspiration. Elara's pulse skipped. Kalen noticed immediately, his expression hardening. Bah. You are not safe yet, he said, and the words carried the weight of inevitability. He will return. Best. And next time, he will not wait for a festival to strike. Elara swallowed, the thrill of power mingling with the cold weight of fear. She had learned much, but she had not learned enough. The castle walls that had seemed so protective now felt like both shield and cage, holding her close to Kalen, and closer to danger she could not yet face alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fortress, Elara realized something she had tried to deny. She was changing.
Her fear was still there, but so was a strange resilience.
And though she hated to admit it, she could not deny the growing pull of the man who had claimed her, the Alpha King who had stepped into her life and altered it forever. Outside, the wind whispered through the fortress walls, carrying a promise of storms to come. And in the shadows, the stranger lingered, waiting for the moment to strike again. Elara pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the pulse of her power, the ache of something more she could not yet name, and the weight of a truth she could not escape. The chains of power and desire were tightening around her, and the world she had once known had begun to crumble. The night came swiftly over Arendor, swallowing the land in shadows that twisted like living things. Within the black fortress, torches flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone walls. Kalen stood at a high window, his eyes scanning the horizon for threats, his jaw tight with tension. He had sensed the stirrings of dark forces, and the pulse of Elara's magic echoed uneasily in his mind. Elara sat nearby, her hands resting lightly on her lap, though her thoughts were anything but calm. The lessons and training had strengthened her control over her curse, but the power inside her still surged unpredictably. She could feel it, whispering through her blood, warning of danger that approached like a storm over distant mountains. You are thinking too much, Kalen said, his voice low, almost a growl, yet edged with concern. Your mind is the first battlefield. Focus, or it will betray you. I cannot stop thinking, she admitted. The stranger. Yes! Waiting. I feel it. Kalen's gaze darkened. Yes, bent, and he will not wait forever. When he comes, he will not come alone. Elara's pulse quickened. The thought of facing the man who had first touched her curse, who had whispered her name like a shadow over her soul, filled her with fear and determination in equal measure. She had grown stronger under Kalen's guidance, but she had not yet faced the true test. That test arrived sooner than either of them expected. At midnight, the fortress alarm sounded, a sharp, keening cry that rolled through the halls like thunder. Guards rushed through the corridors, weapons drawn, as shadows moved against the walls. Elora's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had hoped her training would have been enough to warn her of danger, but even she had not anticipated the sudden ferocity of the attack. Kalen appeared at her side, his presence commanding and steady. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice a dark promise. "But do not stray."
Elara obeyed, gripping the folds of her dress as they moved through the halls. Outside the courtyard was a scene of chaos.
Figures cloaked in dark garments scaled the walls, wielding weapons that glimmered with strange, unnatural light. They were not ordinary men. Their presence carried a subtle hum of magic, one that seemed designed to disturb and destabilize her curse. Kalen moved like a shadow, his blade singing as he cut through the invaders. His movements were precise, powerful, and utterly terrifying. Yet even as he fought, his eyes flicked toward Elara, ensuring she was safe. She could not help but be struck by the duality of him, the ruthless warrior and the protector, each side shining through in equal measure. "Your magic!" he called over the clash of steel and sparks. "Use it! Do not fear it." Elara took a shaky breath, feeling the pulse of the curse thrum in her veins. She raised her hands instinctively, and a surge of blue energy erupted from her fingertips. It rolled outward like a wave, sending the attacker sprawling, their dark weapons scattering harmlessly to the ground. The power was exhilarating and terrifying, but she felt it burn through her, a fire and ice that left her shaking. Kalen's hand found hers, steadying her, grounding her in the moment. Their eyes met, and she saw in him a reflection of her own fear, her own power, and something else, something unspoken, yet undeniable. The battle raged through the fortress, each corridor and chamber becoming a battlefield. Kalen and Elara moved as a single force, her magic complementing his sword, their connection deepening with every moment. Yet even in victory, the cost was clear. Shadows of fire licked the walls. Stone crumbled under the force of unleashed spells, and the fortress bore the marks of the attack. Finally, the attackers retreated into the night, leaving the fortress battered and scarred. Elara collapsed to her knees, her energy spent, her pulse racing. Kalen knelt beside her, his hands steadying her shoulders. "You did well," he said quietly, almost tenderly. "Better than I expected." Elara's chest rose and fell rapidly. I almost lost control," she admitted. "I was afraid I would hurt you. Back." "Or the people here?" Kalen's gaze softened. "You will learn control with time. Fear is natural, but so is courage. And you, Elara, have more courage than you realize." She looked at him, and for a fleeting moment the tension between them eased. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that seemed to exist between them, yet she held back. The memory of the stranger, the danger that still lingered, reminded her that trust was not freely given, even to him. The following days were a blur of repair and preparation. The fortress bore scars from the attack, and Kalen worked tirelessly to fortify it, while Elara practiced controlling her magic, pushing herself further each day. Yet beneath the surface of their shared struggle, the tension between them grew. Every glance, every brush of hands, carried a current of emotion that neither fully acknowledged. One evening, Kalen summoned her to the highest tower. The sky was painted with the colors of dusk, bruised purples and fiery gold, and the wind carried the scent of the distant forest. "Your power grows," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "But power without control is dangerous. Bet. You must learn restraint, or it will destroy you."
I know, Elara replied, her voice steady, though her heart thudded painfully in her chest.
I am trying. I want to control it.
Kylan stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until it seemed as though the world itself had narrowed to the space they occupied. It is not just control you must learn, he said, his eyes dark and unreadable. It is trust. Trust in yourself and trust in me. Her breath caught. She had never felt the weight of his gaze like this before. Not during training, not during battle. It was as if he could see into the deepest parts of her soul, and she did not know whether to fear it or surrender to it. Before she could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of the tower. Elara's pulse leapt, her senses sharpened by fear and instinct. The stranger had returned, more dangerous than before, wielding magic that twisted the very air. Kaelin reacted instantly, drawing his sword with a speed that blurred the line between movement and thought. "Stay behind me!" he commanded. Elara did not wait. Her magic surged, bright and blue, a wave of energy that met the stranger's darkness. The two forces collided in a violent flash, sending wind and sparks through the tower. Elara felt herself lifted by the power, her body trembling as she fought to maintain control. Kaelin's hand found hers again, steadying her, and together they pushed back the stranger's assault. The force of their combined power was overwhelming, and the intruder was thrown back, retreating into the shadows once more. When the dust settled, Kaelin's chest heaved, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "Bet, you are stronger than I imagined," he said, his voice rough with something she could not name, pride, relief, or something more. Elara sank to the floor, exhausted, trembling from the exertion of her magic. I almost lost control again," she whispered. "I could have, hurt you." Kylan knelt beside her, lifting her chin with a firm but gentle hand. "You did not," he said softly. "Farah, not while I am here. You are learning." That is what matters. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the wind through the tower. And for a fleeting heartbeat, the distance between them seemed to vanish. Elara wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap that had grown between fear and longing, yet the memory of danger, of the world outside, held her back. The next morning brought no peace. Word arrived that the attack was only the beginning. The stranger had allies, dark forces aligned with him, and the kingdom itself was now at risk. Kaelin moved with a calculated precision, rallying his forces, securing the borders, and preparing for the battles to come. Elara, too, prepared, not with sword or army, but with her own growing power. She practiced tirelessly, learning to channel the curse, to shape it, to wield it, without fear. Breaths. Each day brought progress, but also exhaustion and doubt. She felt herself changing, not just in strength, but in spirit. She was no longer the girl who had smiled at a festival. She was becoming someone who could stand beside a king, someone who could face the darkness without flinching. And yet, amid the chaos and training, her thoughts returned again and again to Kaelin. The moments they shared, fleeting and charged, were impossible to ignore. She hated herself for it, for the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, for the way her thoughts stumbled over his words and gaze. One night, as she gazed out over the forest, she whispered into the darkness, "I do not know what is coming. I do not know if I am ready." Breaths. And from the shadows the wind carried a whisper of warning, a promise that the storm was not yet spent. The stranger had not finished, and the kingdom, and their hearts, would soon be tested like never before. The dawn broke over Arendor like a fragile promise, painting the black fortress and the surrounding forest in streaks of gold and rose. Yet the beauty of the morning could not hide the tension that hung in the air. Danger had returned, and this time it came not as whispers or shadows, but as a storm of fire, steel, and dark magic. Alara stood on the ramparts, her hands trembling slightly as she felt the pulse of her power in her veins. She had grown stronger, more confident in her abilities, but the threat ahead was unlike anything she had faced. The stranger and his allies had gathered outside the walls, their dark forms barely visible through the morning mist, yet their presence was unmistakable. The curse within her pulsed, warning her of the violence to come. Kalen approached, his black cloak rippling in the wind. He had always moved with command, but now there was a sharpness in his gaze, a clarity of purpose that radiated like steel. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, carrying both authority and concern. Alara lifted her chin, her sapphire eyes reflecting the rising sun. "I am," she said, though her heart beat fast. She could feel the tremor of fear beneath her resolve, but she refused to show it. She had trained for this, grown for this, and now it was time to face the storm. Kaelin's hand brushed hers, brief and grounding, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Their connection had deepened over weeks of training, battles, and shared fear. Neither of them spoke of it, but both felt it, a tether of trust, respect, and something more that neither could yet name. The battle began with a roar. Dark figures surged against the fortress walls, their magic crackling in unnatural hues. Power. Alara felt her own power respond instinctively, a wave of blue energy rolling from her hands to meet the enemy. The ground shook as the forces collided, a violent symphony of light and shadow. Kalen moved through the chaos like a storm incarnate, his sword a blur of precision, his every strike carrying authority and deadly grace. Alara followed, her magic complementing his skill, her movements instinctive and strong. Together they formed a force that was as frightening as it was beautiful, a harmony of strength and power that neither had experienced before. Yet even in victory, danger was never fully tamed. The stranger emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with malice and dark intent. He raised his hands, summoning a surge of twisted energy that struck toward Kalen. Alara reacted without hesitation, channeling her curse into a shield of light that absorbed the blow. The impact shook her to her core, but she did not falter. Desperation. "You are stronger than I thought," the stranger hissed, his voice like ice. "But you are still mine to command." "He is not yours," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and promise. "And you will not take her, not while I draw breath." Alara and Kalen fought as one, their powers intertwined, their trust unspoken but absolute. The stranger's dark magic twisted and struck, but they countered with strength, skill, and instinct. But for every strike he landed, Alara found a way to redirect, to shield, to retaliate. Kalen's sword sang in rhythm with her spells, a deadly duet that drove the enemy back. In the midst of the chaos, Alara realized something profound. Her power was not just destructive, it was protective. Every surge of energy, every pulse of magic could be shaped, guided, and controlled. She was not the curse. She was the master of it. And in that moment, the fear that had haunted her for weeks began to fade. The final confrontation approached. The stranger's allies had fallen or fled, and only he remained, a figure cloaked in darkness, magic coiling around him like a living shadow. He faced them across the battlefield, his eyes gleaming with challenge and fury. "Pay." Kalen turned to Alara, his expression unreadable, but his hand brushing hers in silent reassurance. "Together," he said simply. Alara nodded. "Together," she echoed. They advanced, as one Kalen's sword struck with precision. each movement calculated and deadly. Ilara's magic flowed like water and fire, a force of creation and destruction in balance. The stranger lunged, casting a spell that twisted reality itself, but Ilara's light met it head-on, a brilliant wave that shattered the darkness.
Hey, for a moment, everything hung in balance. Time seemed to slow.
Ilara's pulse thrummed in sync with Kaelin's. Their energy intertwined, their hearts beating with shared resolve. And then, with a final surge, the stranger was thrown back, his power dissipating into the mist. He fled, leaving the battlefield silent but scarred, the forest and fortress bearing the marks of the struggle. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kaelin knelt beside her, his hand steadying her shoulders. "You did it," he said quietly, pride and relief in his voice. "You controlled it. You controlled yourself." She looked up at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I did it," she whispered, disbelief and triumph mingling in her chest. I really did it." Kaelin's gaze softened, and for a moment, the storm of command and dominance fell away. He allowed himself a rare vulnerability, a fleeting smile that touched his eyes.
"You have grown, Ilara."
Stronger than any curse, stronger than fear, and stronger than I ever expected. She felt a warmth in her chest at his words, a mixture of pride, relief, and something deeper that she could not yet name. For weeks she had feared him, resented him, and yet she had come to trust him, rely on him, and feel the strange pull of something far beyond fear or duty. The fortress lay in quiet after the battle, its walls scarred but unbroken. The kingdom beyond was safe, for now, though the memory of the attack lingered like a shadow at the edges of thought. Kaelin and Ilara stood together on the ramparts, overlooking the misty forest, their hands brushing, their bond unspoken but undeniable. "You saved the kingdom," Kaelin said, his voice low, carrying weight and admiration. "But more than that, you saved yourself." Bration. Ilara looked out over the horizon, feeling the pulse of her magic calm, steady, and in control. She had faced the darkness, embraced her curse, and emerged stronger. Yet the journey had changed her in ways she had not anticipated. Fear had been replaced with confidence, doubt with strength, and isolation with connection. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted softly, her gaze meeting his. "You believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." Kaelin's hand found hers fully this time, intertwining their fingers. "And I will continue to believe," he said. "Because you are not just powerful, you are courageous, wise, and necessary. To me, to the kingdom, to everything that matters."
Her chest tightened at the words, the weight of emotion pressing down, but not suffocating.
She understood now what it meant to be claimed, not by force but by trust, respect, and shared destiny. She had feared submission, but this was not submission. This was partnership, tempered by trials, forged in fire and magic, and strengthened by their bond. Days passed in quiet recovery. The fortress was repaired, the kingdom secured, and the memory of the stranger's attack became a lesson in vigilance. Ilara continued to train, her control over her magic now precise, deliberate, and confident. Kaelin remained by her side, not as a shadow of command, but as an ally, a protector, and something more, something neither of them needed to name aloud to feel. One evening as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the black stone, Kaelin and Ilara stood on the ramparts, watching the kingdom stretch beneath them. The forest whispered in the wind, the birds returned to their nests, and the fortress seemed alive with quiet triumph. You have grown, Kalen said, his hand brushing hers once more. Stronger than I ever imagined. Breath. And yet, there is still more to come. Elara smiled softly, a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with magic. Then we face it, she said firmly. Band. Together. Kalen nodded, his storm-tossed eyes reflecting pride, relief, and something unspoken. Together. The word carried weight, promise, and a bond that no curse, no shadow, and no enemy could sever. As the wind whispered through the spires, a shadow flickered on the horizon, a subtle reminder that darkness never truly sleeps. Yet for now, there was triumph, trust, and the quiet bloom of something neither Kalen nor Elara had dared to name aloud. And in that moment, atop the fortress of black stone, they stood side by side, two hearts intertwined, two destinies aligned, and a kingdom saved by courage, magic, and love that had been forged in shadow and flame.